isn't too rampant because there's other things that have, in fact, should we say, taking people's attention. But the key, there are three keys to innovation. The first of it being that it's not incremental. And incrementalism has its place in the quality and the betterment of things. It has its place in certain fields. Integrated circuits is a good example. You know, you get the lines finer and finer, and it lends itself. So when you look back in the 80s, what Japan was doing, which was perhaps creative in one way, it wasn't particularly innovative. What it did is it just, through sheer force, was able to do things. So you mustn't confuse hard work with innovation. In fact, lots of innovation comes from ways, if you've read The Double Helix, for example, that is an amazing book. You wonder if these people ever did any work, and yet they invented, or they discovered rather, DNA. The second is to be sort of a heterogeneous environment, and heterogeneous in many ways, not just in the sense that you have people from other nations coming in, but heterogeneous in backgrounds, disciplines, age groups, and so on. And being heterogeneous is extremely important because new ideas, wherever they come from differences. And if you have an environment that has no differences, you're not going to have much innovation. And what the sad truth is, and maybe this is an example right in front of us, is that when companies who are very internal looking, you know, the nature of a company is to look internally. Yes, you look at your customers and you want to serve your customers, but in terms of product innovation, strategy, you're very internal looking. Not you as a particular company, but big companies are. And then people go out, and then they go to conferences of their own kind. You meet your own people. You're a biologist, you go to a conference with biologists, and so you're still, it's not quite heterogeneous enough. So heterogeneity is a big deal. And then the last on my list, obviously there are many, but the three that I focused on is risk. Having an appetite for risk, and the profile of a country and people to have that appetite for risk. Now, risk is real important. Clearly, if you're a mother and a father who have escaped China, let's say, and gone to the United States, and you're both working hard, and you've got one or two children, and you're working 18 hours a day, each parent, 7 days a week, and all you're doing is trying to have your kids go to college. You do not instill risk into your kids when you do that. You want them to go and be investment bankers or something terrible like that. The idea being that risk is at home, it's in the culture, it's all over the place. I've had the great pleasure of knowing Romano Prodi for many years, and when he was head of the EU, he asked me once at dinner, he said, "Nicholas, if you could change anything, just give me one thing to change. Don't give me a big picture about, you know, farm subsidies and stuff like that. What's the one thing you would change?" And I said, "Romano, the one thing I would change is the bankruptcy laws." And bankruptcy laws in Europe, if you change them across all countries, would just do a miracle for innovation. They right now, in some countries, as you know, in Europe, it's criminal to go bankrupt. Now, if you keep that, you're toast. And if you don't change the bankruptcy laws, you'll just sit here and watch a lot of things happen over the next 10 years. My last remark on innovation in general is again, a story. Now, in this story, it happens a little later. My stories tend to be family stories. My father had died. My mother was living in multiple places, but at a particular time in Switzerland, in a ski resort where she had a home, and our son, my son, was living in Italy. He had spent 8 years living in Italy and would drive up. Since he was in Milan and she was in Closters, he could drive in 2.5 hours. He could go visit her. And so we met at Christmas once there, and she had arranged things where she would have breakfast with everybody whenever they got up. And this was prime time for her, so she'd get up real early, she'd plop herself at the breakfast table, and people in the family got up at different times to go skiing, and whatever time they went to have breakfast, she would get sort of 20, 30 minutes of their time, and it was real prime time, so she would start at 7 and end at 10, sort of having eventually breakfast with everybody. And this was her pattern, and she loved it, and it was perfect. First person to get up every morning was my son. His name is Dimitri. He got up real early because he wanted to go skiing and get the snow. And what he had been doing is starting a company in Italy. Now, starting a company in Italy is a little bit like shooting yourself in the foot, because I watched Dimitri do things in 1 month that our kids took 1 day to do. Just the notaries and the little stamps and the bureaucracy. So that's okay. I still thought it was terrific that he was doing it. So he came upstairs to tell his grandmother every morning about the company he was starting in Italy. He was really excited about it. And all he would talk about was the company he was starting in Italy. Now, she was quite a bit over 80. She didn't really understand it, but she was so thrilled to see her grandson thrilled that this breakfast was terrific, and this went on for a few days. I was always, by the way, the last person to get up. And about on the 4th or 5th day, I get up, I go upstairs to have my little breakfast, and I look at my mother, and this really unhappy lady. And she's looking, and she's really not annoyed, but quite unhappy. And I say, what's wrong? She said, well, I've had all of these breakfasts with Dimitri, and I now understand what he does. I said, well, isn't it terrific? She says, no, it's not terrific at all. He's unemployed. That was a European point of view, and that was her view of what he was doing.